Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're continuing our beginner's guide to Crusader Kings 3, discussing the all-important topic of war. You might be wondering, what is it good for? And you might be thinking, absolutely nothing. But in these violent times, war is often the answer to many questions, whether it's the response to a grudge, taking land back from your siblings after an unfortunate succession, or just in order to expand your own realm. War is good for quite a bit. I'll go into further depth on topics we've touched on earlier in previous videos in this series, but if you'd like to skip around, timestamps are available down below. With lots to discuss, and no more time to waste, let's dive in. Claims. Deserving of a spotlight of their own, claims play a key role in most wars you'll be fighting, so let's take a moment to discuss what they are exactly. Displayed on a character's information screen, if they have any, claims can be of three types, and they are literally titles that a character can claim as their own to varying degrees, depending on the type of claim. Pressed claims, unpressed claims, and implicit claims. Pressed claims are inherited by the character's primary heir, but they become unpressed claims when that transition happens. Unpressed claims are not inherited, but they can be turned into pressed claims by fighting a war for them, even if the war ends in a draw, also known as a white peace. So, if you have any unpressed claims close to the end of your life, and you want to make sure they pass on to your kids, you'll want to press them through war before death comes. Implicit claims are automatically given to the children of a character with titles. They will all have implicit claims on their parents' titles, and any titles they don't inherit on the parent's death will be turned into pressed claims instead. Claims can be gained in a few different ways. The most common of these is to have your realm priest perform the fabricate claim action to get an unpressed claim on the targeted county. It takes time and costs money, and if discovered in the act, it can cause the holder of the targeted county to be upset at you. But it is the simplest and most universal way of getting a claim. If your realm priest has a particularly high learning, there's a small chance of getting a claim on the entire duchy that the county is a part of instead. As a dynasty head, you can claim the primary title that another member of the dynasty has, giving you an unpressed claim on it. And if you've got the Sanction Loopholes perk, you can use the buy claim interaction to do the same at the cost of piety. More piety for higher ranked titles. The Meritocracy perk will allow you to claim your liege's primary title through the Claim Throne scheme, and if your head of faith is a spiritual head of faith, you can ask them to grant you a claim to a title by right-clicking on its current holder and making the request. Obtaining claims is a relatively easy thing to do, and it's one of the simplest ways to justify a war, a very important concept in the world of Crusader Kings. You always need a Casus Belli. In Crusader Kings, one does not simply declare war at random. A Casus Belli is always required. This is a cause or justification for war, and they come in a variety of forms depending on who you're playing as, who you're targeting, your faith, and what innovations you have unlocked. War with a person always costs either prestige or piety, and if you don't have enough of the one you need to pay, you can always choose to take a hit to your level of fame or level of devotion instead. The most common type of Casus Belli is for claims. If your character has claims to a title that they don't currently have, they can go to war with the person that does have it in order to obtain that title for themselves. This is the simplest way of growing your realm. The title is added to your list of titles, the land comes under your direct control, and at that point, you can do with it as you please. Keep it for yourself, give it to a vassal, give it to a member of your court or family to make a new vassal, whatever makes you happy. Just like you can use one of your own claims to go to war, you can go to war to help others push their claims as well. You can only do this if the person is in your realm, a family member, an existing vassal, or a member of your court, and you need to be careful when declaring war in this manner. If the title you're helping them get is at the same rank as your own title, they will gain independence when you win. But if it's below your primary title, they'll just be a vassal with the new land and title you've gained for them. To find people with such claims that you can push, you can either let some visit you at random and pay to recruit them into your court when the opportunity comes, Or you can seek claimants, increasing the likelihood of a claimant coming to visit, at which point you have to pay to recruit them to your court as well. Alternatively, you can marry somebody and bring them to your court that way. Just make sure that the marriage is matrilineal for any time you're marrying a woman in your court out, because otherwise the two characters won't end up in your court, they'll end up in the man's court. Apart from that, you can select a parcel of land you'd like to acquire, click on the associated title banner, and click here to see any claimants that might exist for it. Right-click on any interested parties and invite them to your court, if possible. You might need to send them gifts, sway them, or gain a hook on them to convince them, but once they accept your invitation, you can help push their claims as mentioned earlier. Whether you're pushing your own claims or somebody else's, you will have to pay in prestige, though it should be noted that pushing your own claims is cheaper than pushing somebody else's. It's important to note as well that at any given time, you can only push one claim, and you cannot take more than that claim when the war is won. This selection happens on this screen, where you choose whose claims to push, and under the objective, pick which one of those claims to push specifically. The only exception to the situation is with the Divine Right innovation unlocked, or the Rightful Ownership innovation unlocked, that allows you to push multiple claims for yourself or for others, respectively. On a victory, the claimant get their titles, and if you were helping somebody else get a title, you gain a weak hook on them as well. Losing these wars will result in the loss of the claim that was used to start the war. Another common casus belli is the Independence War. This can be declared against your own liege at any time at the cost of prestige, with it being much cheaper for tribal governments. Winning makes the attacker's realm independence, but losing results in the attacker being imprisoned and the defender having the option to revoke titles from the attacker. Seizure is another type of casus belli, and you can use that at varying scales, though they are locked behind innovations. You can seize de jure counties with the tribal era casus belli innovation, de jure duchies with the early medieval era chronicle writing innovation, and all de jure titles with a late medieval era rightful ownership innovation. Apart from these innovations, the only other thing you need is some prestige per county you'd be seizing, no matter which of the three casus belli you're using, and you need to hold the title above the target title. The idea here is that because you hold a certain title, technically and legally speaking, or in other words, de jure, the titles below it should belong to you as well. So if they don't, you're going to seize them from the target through this type of war. You can see title hierarchy by clicking on a title's banner and looking up over here. From left to right, you're going higher up the hierarchy. Conquering enough counties in a duchy allows you to create the duchy title, or usurp it from its current holder if it already exists. The same applies to kingdom and empire titles as well. Once you've done so and acquired that top-level title for yourself, you can use the appropriate seizure casus belli to conquer the rest of the counties that would fall under that title, though you have to declare and fight these wars one realm at a time. You don't just kick off a massive free-for-all. Winning gains you the new titles and land, and a weak hook on any vassals who gain titles and land as well, but losing results in no changes in the borders and the payment of war reparations by the attacker. If you are either of a tribal government, of an Eastern religion, or have a temporal head of faith, you can also subjugate a target, forcing them to become your vassal, though it can cost 500 prestige for a tribal target and 1,000 prestige for a non-tribal target. Winning will make the defender a vassal of the attacker, but losing will cause discontent in the attacker's realm instead. Forced vassalization is available if you have the Forced Vassalage perk, and if the target is an independent neighbor with 3 counties at most, though you can target bigger realms if you have casus belli, chronicle writing, divine right, or rightful ownership innovations unlocked. It costs 125 prestige per county that belongs to the target, so it can get pretty expensive when targeting larger independent realms. Winning makes the target a vassal, but a loss causes discontent in the attacker's realm. The Ducal Conquest casus belli becomes available if you have the Ducal Conquest perk, and you can declare it on anybody who owns counties In a duchy, you already own a county in, but only if the duchy title has not yet been created. There's a hefty cost of prestige depending on whether the target is a count or higher, and a loss results in discontent in the attacker's realm. Clan and tribal governments, as well as people who follow faiths with the pursuit of power or warmonger tenet, will be able to use conquest Casus Belli. These can target any county, duchy, or even kingdom, but you can only use it to target a kingdom once per lifetime, and they all require a minimum level of fame, established, illustrious, and exalted among men, respectively. Declaring this kind of war costs piety if targeting somebody of the same faith, and prestige if targeting somebody of a different faith, with the higher ranked titles requiring higher costs. You can also use holy wars as long as you have an organized faith without dharmic pacifism or pacifism as tenets, but the target is limited to people whose faith is either seen as hostile or evil by your own. These can also target counties, duchies, and kingdoms, requiring more piety as the ranks go higher, but also reducing the fervor of the faith and needing a higher level of devotion at each scale: dutiful, faithful, and paragon of virtue. Note as well, the holy war at a kingdom level can only be declared once per lifetime, just like the conquest Casus Belli. If you are a temporal head of faith, you can declare a directed great holy war, upon whose victory you gain the targeted kingdom. Others of the same faith can join in on the war, and they will share in the spoils, including piety and titles within the new kingdom. When an undirected holy war is declared by a spiritual head of faith, people can pledge their assistance and pick a beneficiary, a member of their own dynasty. If the war is won, the spoils are split according to the contributions of all parties involved, and the beneficiaries receive titles in the newly acquired targeted kingdom. The one with the highest war contribution gains the kingdom for themselves. There are some Casus Belli that are there for reasons other than obtaining more land, or primarily to do other things first. If your faith has the human sacrifice tenet, you can raid for captives, paying piety in order to get prisoners from the target's court, if you win. You can also often find yourself called into war by an ally. If that happens and you accept the call, make sure you actually partake in the fighting. If not, your ally will take notice of your false promises, and it might sour relations. At times, you won't be called to war, but instead will feel compelled to get involved, particularly if your liege is involved in a war you'd rather see won. In that case, you can always offer to join their war as well. Whether it's for land or liege or god or something else entirely, with a Casus Belli in place, it's time for the declaration of war. With a Casus Belli in place, there are a few final things to keep in mind before declaring war. I've stated this countless times before, but it's worth mentioning again. Keep an eye on who you're actually declaring war on. You might have selected a small county for a small claim, but if you're targeting somebody from another kingdom or empire, their liege will get involved, right up to the highest level. That is the relationship between lord and vassal, after all, and besides that, if you're attacking to conquer land from a different kingdom or empire, that king or emperor stands to lose land as well, so of course they'll get involved. Now, if you're a vassal, you can declare war on another vassal serving the same liege without concern, as long as the liege's authority level allows it. This is how you can grow from a small count to a great duke, followed by a declaration of independence to give yourself your own independent realm. Apart from the actual target of the war, consider the allies on both sides of the war as well, though keep in mind this doesn't take into consideration a house head's ability to drag members of the house into war without the need of a formal alliance. Also keep in mind that allies might not join, which means your own allies might not join either, so always prepare yourself for a worst-case scenario. It's not a bad idea to use this as a reference for how your strength compares to that of your enemy, but you should also take a look at how wealthy the target is. If they can afford mercenaries, you should keep that in mind, as it might heavily shift the balance of power. You can also see here what other wars the target is involved in, and how they're going. Negative numbers suggest they're losing these wars, while positive numbers suggest they're winning them. Remember also that even if your allies are willing to join you in your war, it costs prestige if you're the attacker. So make sure you have enough banked up if you're relying on your friends to come and help. It can cause up to 350 prestige to invite a fellow king, and 750 for an emperor. Note, this is only when you're the attacker. If you're the defender, you do not have to pay prestige to ask for assistance. When declaring a holy war, any other rulers of the same faith as the target can join on their side to help defend, without the need for an alliance. It's also good to keep in mind the negative modifiers that accrue over the course of a war. After 6 months have passed, the attacker starts to gain a negative opinion with all of their vassals, getting a growing penalty to relations that will begin to fade away only after the warring is done. Offensive wars will also cause a negative modifier to opinion. These are avoided with defensive wars, civil wars, great holy wars, and with faiths that have the warmonger tenet. So, with the target set, alliances measured, a Casus Belli picked out, and the risk of mercenaries weighed in, it's time to make sure that winning will get you what you want, losing won't hurt too much, and a draw is acceptable before finally declaring war. On doing so, the target realm's flag will appear down here with a percentage, and that percentage is the war score. The war score indicates how the war is going, and it can swing from negative 100% to positive 100%, suggesting that you are either losing terribly or winning magnificently. War score is impacted by controlling the objectives as set out by the declaration of war, winning battles, occupying territory, and capturing prisoners of value. An occupied capital gives an extra 10%, capturing an heir gives 50, 25, and 10%, whether it's a primary, second, or third heir, and taking the opposing ruler themselves gives a full 100% bonus score. As war score trickles up to plus 30, the winning side can push for a white peace, or a draw. At plus 100, you can enforce your demands, and at negative 100, the enemy might enforce theirs. You might not want to end a war as soon as possible, though, even if you're winning. Every time you win a siege, something we'll touch more on in a moment, you get the loot that's available at the location. Every one siege, and even every victorious battle, can also net you some prisoners, and these prisoners can be ransomed for money or hooks, tortured for secrets, or just kept in your dungeon to rot. All that aside, though, you can push for peace as soon as you're ready. When the war is done, apart from winners and losers getting their due as determined by the declaration of war and Casus Belli, there is also a distribution of prestige to allies of both sides, regardless of the winner, and the signing of a truce. Now, if this truce is broken, there is a huge loss in prestige, a drop in level of fame, and reduced general opinion for a handful of years as well. But now we're jumping the gun. Let's talk about how one gets to that victory. Army composition. Your armies will consist of levies, knights, or whatever the regional equivalent name is, and men at arms. Each will have 4 stats: damage, toughness, pursuit, and screen. Damage represents how much damage each soldier inflicts. Toughness represents how much damage each soldier can take before they die or rout. Pursuit increases how much damage each soldier can inflict on a routing enemy unit, and screen decreases the amount of damage each soldier will take while retreating themselves. Levies are the lowest tier of warrior, with a damage and toughness stat of 10 each, raised from your own domain and from your vassals' contributions, as discussed in prior videos. Knights are limited in number based on your prestige and how many military academies have been built in your realm. These are individual characters in your court, and you can obtain knights by either putting out a call for them at the cost of prestige, or simply finding people to invite to your court, or marrying capable people into your court instead. You can force people to be knights, a potential option for your most capable fighters, but also for your weakest fighters if you want them removed for some reason or another. You can also leave it up to them to decide based on how good they are compared to other potential knights, or you can forbid them from being knights to keep them safe. which is not a bad idea for an ideal heir or for otherwise capable individuals you want to keep alive. The key stat that matters with knights is their prowess. It represents their skill in single combat, and each point represents a 100 damage stat and a 10 toughness stat. So with a prowess of 1, though they're as fragile as a levy soldier, they're 10 times as damaging. And that's at their weakest. The men-at-arms are mid-tier units, each with specific roles, specific things they counter, specific terrain they're better or worse on, and specific stats, recruited at the cost of gold or prestige, depending on who you're playing as. You can only have a certain number of regiments dictated by a few factors as seen here, but you are able to upgrade each regiment to increase the number of soldiers in it. There are just short of 40 types of men-at-arms units, unlocked based on your culture, region, special circumstances, and innovations, and I wouldn't be surprised if more are added over time and tweaks are made to some numbers for existing men-at-arms as well. So rather than go over each in detail, I'm going to explain how to read these details and highlight some considerations to make so you know how to make the decisions even if the variables change. Damage will tell you how effective a unit is at reducing enemy numbers, while toughness will tell you its survivability. Units that have a high pursuit will kill more enemy units when the battle is already won, and a high screen will protect the unit from the same consequences when their own army has been defeated. Note that pursuit and screen don't always apply. If a battle is won in the opening stages, these two stats don't matter, as the losing army will be completely wiped out. Note also that all of these numbers can be improved through innovations, lifestyle perks, and through buildings. Good examples of the buildings you can build include archery grounds, blacksmiths, jousting fields, siege works, palisades, war camps, barracks, camelries, desert agriculture, elephantries, hill farms, hunting grounds, military camps, outposts, pastoral lands, quarries, regimental grounds, and forts at higher levels. There are a lot of options, so make sure you scan through the potential buildings you might want to make to improve the units that you're going to be using more of. Again, consider building these buildings based on that type of units you intend to recruit, as you will amplify their performance significantly. When a unit counters another type of unit, it will reduce how much damage that countered unit does based on the size of the countering unit. It's a good idea to hover over enemy armies to see what kinds of units they're fielding, and perhaps prepare your own men-at-arms to counter those. It's also a good idea to consider what terrain you're likely to be fighting on in the foreseeable future. You can see this either by clicking on the holdings in question and hovering over here, or you can use the terrain map mode to get a quicker read across larger portions of land at a time. Once you have a general idea of what's most likely, you can use that to influence the men-at-arms you recruit. Keep in mind that not all buffs and debuffs are made equal. Hover over the terrain icons to see exactly what is impacted on that terrain type and by how much. Siege engines are a special type of men-at-arms unit that don't partake in regular battles, but they are extremely important for sieges, a constant in all wars. The presence of siege engines in an army will make a siege go by faster as long as the level of the fort that you have put under siege is below this number. I'll touch more on that in a moment. You can also recruit mercenaries if you have enough gold, and you're even able to take on a little bit of debt to hire mercenaries as well. They come with levies, knights, and men-at-arms of their own, and you can obtain them for a contract that lasts a few years, and that can be extended if needed, if you can afford it. They also come with their own commanders, which is the last part of the army that needs discussing. The commander of any raised army can be changed by clicking here, and the ideal commander for any army will have a high commander advantage and appropriate traits. Commander advantage is a straight numerical comparison. The bigger this number, the better the commander, as determined by their martial skill, perks, and if leading their own men in battle or not. Note that this is not the same as their prowess, which actually determines their survivability in combat instead. The commander traits, meanwhile, are a major variable. Some commanders fight better in deserts. Some will make sieges faster. Some are better at fighting against armies of another faith. Some can traverse waterways without the army suffering any penalties. These traits can be very situational, so consider them and their value individually when picking who leads an army. It isn't a bad idea, for example, to have smaller armies sieging enemy forts led by a military engineer, while a larger army goes around crushing enemies led by an aggressive attacker. Armies can be quickly split into halves, or you can select which units to separate into a new army if you want to be particular. You can also raise armies separately. Using rally points, you can either raise your entire army at one spot, taking longer to fully assemble the farther they all have to come from, or you can raise only the soldiers that are closest to the rally point as opposed to a different rally point that you've placed down. With the army raised and organized, it's time to march to war. Armies can be selected with the left mouse button and moved with the right click. They can embark to sea at a fee, though the cost to maintain the army will go up when they're at sea as well. You can set waypoints for their movement by holding down Shift while you right-click multiple times. When moving, armies will have an arrow at their feet showing which way they're headed. If this arrow is golden, it means the order can still be halted or changed, but if the arrow is gray, it means the order is locked in place. You can use this to plan your attacks, waiting until the enemy has committed to a move before making your own. As you move around, apart from the threats of enemy armies, there is another threat to keep in mind: attrition. Attrition occurs under a few specific circumstances, and while I've previously touched on it broadly as it pertains to supply limits, it's time for some more clarity on the subject. Every holding has a supply limit, calculated based on a few different factors. You can see the supply limit on hovering over the holding, and this determines how many soldiers can be sustained on that holding. If you have an army selected and hover over potential destinations, you'll see how much supply the army needs, how much is available, and if the army will be over the supply limit or not. The supply limit has to sustain all armies standing in the holding, not just yours, so you and your allies' armies will add up. Should your army stand on territory where the supply limit cannot sustain them, or if they spend more than 30 days at sea, they will start to lose supplies over time, and it can only be regained by standing on friendly territory. When this drop crosses a threshold and the army is undersupplied, indicated by this icon here, the army will start to suffer reduced advantage in battle, making them worse in a fight. When supply goes below 10, the army will begin to starve. This brings with it a severe loss of advantage and brings with it attrition and the monthly loss of soldiers in the army. Attrition will also take place when besieging an enemy fort, regardless of supplies, though it's only at 1% attrition per month. It does, however, stack with starvation. The final form of attrition takes place when traveling from one enemy county to another. Indicated by a red skull, a small number of soldiers will be lost every time this happens. Note, this only happens when moving from one enemy county to another. Staying in the same county, moving between holdings within it, won't cause it. But the moment you cross the border from one enemy county into another enemy county, you'll take this hit. For the purpose of this conversation, a county is considered friendly if it's occupied by you or your allies, as indicated by these stripes on enemy territory. This isn't the biggest deal, to be honest, but it can add up, so it's best to keep an eye out for it if you're planning on charging an enemy capital deep in their heartlands. If you even make it there in the first place, considering you're likely to fight. Battles. When two armies from opposing sides of a war are headed to the same holding, they will prepare to engage in battle. You can see what the predicted outcome is and why by hovering over the little icon, and you can use this to make a quick decision on whether to commit or not. Keep in mind, this balance of power here doesn't take into consideration any reinforcements that might be sent over later. When the two armies finally clash, they will fight over a period of time determined by their sizes and how effectively one defeats the other. During this time, other armies can be ordered to join in on the battle, shifting the balance of power as they arrive. The first thing to take into consideration is combat width. It's determined by the terrain upon which the battle is taking place and by the sizes of the engaged armies. This determines how many soldiers will be actively fighting at any given time, and basically the width along which the fighting will take place, and as a result, how many losses either side can take at any given time. Advantage is determined at the beginning of the battle, with the commander's base advantage further modified based on these factors you see on screen, mixed in with terrain, buildings, and relevant traits. The difference between the advantages of the two armies determines who will perform better, causing more damage for every point of advantage over the enemy. Every 3 days, a dice roll will happen as the two commanders try to shift the advantage to themselves. These dice rolls will be added to the base advantage that was already being calculated, and these dice rolls can be affected by traits as well. Some are risk takers, allowing for higher and lower extremes on their rolls, while others are cautious, preferring to reduce their maximum potential roll while also avoiding a lower minimum roll. You can also see here the terrain being fought on, which men-at-arms are on the field, with the ones countered by the opponent or by the terrain being highlighted in red. And you can also see the number of soldiers, how many have been routed, and commander traits. With all this in place, the battle will go through its 4 phases: maneuver, early, late, aftermath. Maneuver is all about getting set up, with the first advantage dice rolls being made. The early phase kicks off the dealing of damage, with ticks happening every day. Armies cannot retreat during the early phase, and if the battle ends in the early phase, the losing army is completely wiped out. In the late phase, damage continues on a daily basis until one side runs out of toughness, or one side decides to retreat, something you can do by selecting your army and giving it a move order away from the battle. This turns all fighting units into routing units. In the aftermath, the winning army tries to kill routing units using pursuit, while they try to stay alive using screen. The losing army is forced to retreat with its survivors a fair few holdings away before they regain control. And when this is happening, they move at a faster rate than normal, and they can be quite hard to catch. If an army loses a battle, there is a small chance for its commander to be captured, and each knight in the losing army has a small chance to be captured and a 5% chance to be killed. These chances are increased significantly if the army is defeated in the early phase. The wounding and killing of knights and commanders can also happen during the course of a battle, as determined by their prowess, and you can see an after-action report by clicking here and sifting through the details. Battles will only get you so far in war, though. Ultimately, you'll need to occupy enemy territory, and for that, we need to discuss sieges. When an army enters a fortified enemy holding, they begin a siege. The siege lasts a set number of days at most, as determined by the fort level of the castle, and progress is made daily as long as the besieging army is larger than the garrison. This fort level can be increased through buildings and lifestyle perks, and it's a good idea defensively to increase the fort level of castles located at choke points or particularly important strategic locations. Not only will this slow the enemy down as they have to put the county under siege for longer, but the same buildings typically also increase the garrison's size, meaning a larger besieging army will be needed to make any progress at all. So when you're going on the attack, keep an eye out for these two factors. You won't make any progress if your army is smaller than the garrison, and the fort level will help give you an estimate of how long the siege itself might take. Remember that the besieging army suffers attrition for the entire duration of the siege. The bigger the size difference between the attacking army and the garrison, the faster the siege will progress, and there are perks and commander traits that can make sieges go more quickly as well. With that said, the difference is marginal compared to the difference a few siege engine men-at-arms can make. As per our earlier discussion, these siege engines are only effective up to certain fort levels, so make sure you're not falling behind with this technology. As time goes on, every 20 days, various events might occur that either speed the siege up or maintain the status quo, and depending on the siege engines you have, you might break the walls of the fort, further accelerating things and allowing you to assault the fort, an action that should only be taken as a desperate last resort. Never assault a fort. When a siege is won, you have a chance of capturing or killing characters that were at that location, and you will get the loot available in that holding as well. To occupy a county, every fortified building within that county needs to be put under siege and occupied. When this happens, the entire county will have stripes to indicate that you currently occupy it. Alternatively, if an enemy occupies some territory, your land will have stripes of their color on it instead. One important thing to keep in mind is that if an army engages a besieging army, the besieging army is considered the attacker, and they take on any penalties or advantages they would have had if they were the aggressor. The relief army counts as the defenders, getting all associated advantages and disadvantages that come with that. Sieges are the most surefire way of attaining a quick victory, holding the objective, occupying territory, getting prisoners. Expect them to happen often, and value your siege engines and siege expert commanders accordingly. Raiding. On the topic of loot, raiding is an excellent option available to tribal government factions, acting as an efficient way of making money and prestige. Raising a raiding army is done similar to a regular army, just using a different button at the rally point, and the larger the army is, the more loot it can carry before it has to return home to deposit it. Raiding a territory begins a temporary war with the person that holds it, allowing the target to respond and wipe out your army, taking back the loot it has should the raiders be defeated. This is a good reason to go chasing after people raiding your own territory too. Raiders can only take to the seas with the long ships or West African canoes innovations, and targets will take some time to raid, so try and be effective by finding holdings with the highest amount of available loot. All holdings can be raided. This isn't limited to fortified holdings like sieges, so take your pick of the richest holdings that are closely packed, grab your loot, and head back home. A target realm can only be raided once every 5 years, however, so make sure you're headed back home with your fill. Raiding can also capture or kill characters, which has value of its own in the form of ransom, hooks, and more, and raiding armies also have a chance of turning a raid into a sack, which grants even more wealth and prestige, though it severely damages the county being sacked. It's not a bad idea to designate a commander or two to be your main raiders. Leading raids over a certain number of times will increase the likelihood of a commander gaining the raider trait, making them more efficient at the job. Raiders, and regular armies too, should always be disbanded after the job is done. They all cost money to maintain and reinforce, and though raiders are cheaper to maintain than a regular army, it's still not a bad idea to save money for more than just maintaining an idle, standing army of either type. Another long video for an extremely major topic. I hope this will help you in becoming a superior commander on the battlefield. If you have any questions, thoughts, opinions, or suggestions of your own you'd like to share, as always, feel free to do so down below. And as always as well, if you're looking forward to more Crusader Kings or strategy gaming content in general, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel, and maybe even check out our Discord, linked in the description down below, a community of over 3,000 strategy gaming fans. Apart from that, the rest of the guide videos can be found in the playlist linked in the description down below as well. And with all that said, it's time to call it a day on this video. But of course, we can't do that without first giving a massive thanks to all of my channel members and patrons for supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.